The room was quiet and dim, its ceiling lost amid banners high overhead. Rows of benches faced the dais, where impassive guards stood behind high-backed chairs. Rising from one of them to greet him was an elegant, dark-haired man with a moustache. He looked sterner than when he'd been juggling floating crockery in mid-air by the mill. "Lord Morgrim?" Delmare asked, holding the teacup carefully out in front of him. The Lord of Shadowdale nodded. "I meant to speak to you earlier. I am Delmare Rallyhorn of Colmare. I understand I am expected." Lord Morgrim smiled. "Eh? Though I confess I know not the reason for your visit. Sit, if you would, and tell me why you've come, and where you came by the china you hold." Delmare sat. I met the knights of Myth Draenor on the road. One of them handed me this. Alas, sir. Your guard captain at the bridge suggested I return it to you." "My thanks," Morgrim replied, waving a hand in a signal. As a servant came in with a tray of cheese, bread, and chilled wine, the guards began to silently file out. In a breath or two they were alone. "Eat," Morgrim said, taking up a slice of cheese, "and tell me of your purpose. Speak freely, please." Delmare set the teacup and saucer down carefully on the nearest empty chair and said, "I am heir of the House Rallyhorn. I, the regents appointed by King Azorn to administer my lands, have now agreed to allow me to avenge my father's death." He cleared his throat nervously as Morgrim frowned. "Regents?" the Lord asked. "What of your mother?" I never knew my mother. My mother, the Lady Shalrin, sickened and went away long before my father's death. Do not speak of her much in Rallyhorn Hall. I know not why." "You are now of age?" Morgrim asked. Delmare nodded. "Yes, lord," he said wearily. "I have not been allowed to travel before, but Lord Huntsilver, chief among my regents, has evidently come to hold the opinion that journeying would be good for me. He said it was high time I learned some of the things about the world that cannot be taught by mere words and lessons." Morgrim smiled. "This all sounds familiar. I was in your boots only a few summers ago." He handed Delmare a goblet. "But you spoke of avenging your father's death. I know of no Cormyrean noble who fell here, of any name or lineage." Delmare spread his hands. "My father fell somewhere near at hand. I know not where. I know only that I can trust whoever it is that wears my father's ring. He gave it, the Lord Regents told me, to someone he loved and trusted above all others, ere he died. Everyone says that Elements of Shadowdale is the greatest sage of the realms. I came in hopes that he knows of my father's fall, and who it is that wears this ring. Everyone, it seems, comes to Shadowdale in hopes that I know something," said a familiar voice, dryly. "I've often wondered, know ye, if they'd all just be as happy as I gave easy and ready answers, and made it all up." Delmare turned for the first time. The lack of a cowl and presence of sufficient light let him see the sage of Shadowdale clearly. A thin, snow-bearded, distinguished-looking old man in a nondescript robe stood amid the tapestries behind the dais like a watchful shadow. Hawk-like eyes gathered Delmare's gaze irresistibly, seeming to stare right into his mind. Delmare shuddered, hand automatically reaching for sword hilt. The old man's gaze stopped that cold hand. Then he nodded, sardonically, eyes still locked with Delmare's trapped gaze. "Well met, Delmare Rallyhorn," Elminster of Shadowdale said wearily. "Head of the House Rallyhorn, of Colmare, son and heir of rural Rallyhorn, come to claim thy own. We have anticipated thee. Look, thy father saw, kept safe for ye these long years, Dulcimer the Bright Blade." The old mage nodded at the long bundle of cloth of a nearby chain. Delmare followed his gaze down only reluctantly, but once he followed at the bulky roll of grey cloth, he could not tear his eyes away. His father's magical blade, whose merest touch could destroy undead. The Lord Regents had thought it lost forever. It was real. The tale, then, was all real. "There it is," Elminster said simply. "Take it." Delmare did not move. He stared at the wrapped hidden sword for the space of long breath and then swallowed, raising his eyes again to meet Elminster's bright gaze. "They said my father died of fright when he went to slay the lich in Malertha Undra," he said, quietly but formally. I've sworn to avenge my father's death, and I ask you, great sage, to tell me where I might find this lich." Elminster nodded. "I can take you to where it layers tonight." "Tonight?" The boy paled. "Aye. Why waste time over such things? The blade's touch will destroy on death. This power is true and undiminished. The deed should prove simple." Delmare hesitated. "Should?" he echoed, hearing the slight emphasis the old sage had given that word. Elminster shrugged. "We shall see," was all he said. The old mage stepped unsteadily onto the table, unnoticed amongst the tumult of the feast hall. Dancers whirled around the room, the music they were following scarcely to be heard through all the chatter and drunken laughter. He looked all around at the scene, smiled once or twice, and then raised a hand. "Be still," he said mildly in a quiet voice. Some trick of magic carried those calm tones to every corner of the room, and an instant later a hush fell upon the hall. Someone coughed once, and all was still. "Well met," Elminster said. "I think ye all know me." His steady gaze forestalled any replies or comments, and he went on. "But I have one man here with me who is probably unfamiliar to ye all." He turned and beckoned to Delmare, who stood face flushed, his father's sword, his sword, now naked and glittering in his hand, as Thurball had told him to bear it. Slowly, as Malgrim had entered him to walk, Delmare strode forward to where Elminster stood. It seemed a very long way, and the weight of the stairs on him much heavier than he'd ever felt in the courts of Colmere. "This is Delmare Rallyhorn of Colmere. He is the drawn sword this night, to save us all." Elminster gestured imperiously, and Delmare obediently stepped on a chair and clambered up onto the table to stand beside the old mage. It creaked. Once, and he followed Elminster's gesturing hand to stare out at the hall from his new vantage point. All of the folk there, even the tower guards and the bard, Stormsilverhand at their head, were silently raising their hands to him in the warrior salute. Delmare stared at them, over a sudden lump in his throat. He saw tears glittering in the eyes of some of the old men, and saw nods of respect and silent prayers being mouthed. What was going on? Why did this mean so much to these people? He turned to Elminster, a question in his eyes, and opened his mouth to ask. The old mage met his eyes and said firmly, "Later. Now take my hand." Delmare did as he bid, and the world whirled. Amid sudden flashing blue lights, Delmare saw Aelith come into the hall and her mother behind her. Her eyes were wild as the lights whirled and hid her face. He saw terror flash across it. "No!" Her despairing scream echoed across Delmare's head as he fell, tumbling endlessly through blue mists. Blue mist swirled and was gone. There was a hard rock under his boots. Delmare blinked. Pale moonlight touched the trees around them, where a moment before he'd been looking at the warm torchlit walls within the tower. Delmare blinked again, hefting the splendid sword that was now his own, and tried to see into the deep gloom of a night-cloaked woods all around. He stood with the old mage on a rocky hilltop somewhere in the wilderness, far from the roads and lights. A dark forest stood all about them. Off to the east it seemed thinner, broken by piles of tumbled stone, a ruin. He peered and saw turrets, spires, and broken walls. Where were they? Elminster let go of the boy's arm. "Of old, this part of Myth Draenor was known as Moondown Hill," he said quietly. "That which ye seek awaits there." Delmare gulped. Myth Draenor? He clutched at the blade he held, shivered and stared wildly all around. Something moved in the night, something dark, rising menacingly out of the darkness of the trees. Flapping heavily towards them, the younger warrior gulped, found his mouth suddenly very dry, and raised an unsteady hand to point. Elminster did not move. Delmare tasted cold fear and turned frantically. The old mage stood watching, the large dark thing approaching on the leathery wings. His face was calm, even bored. Delmare tried to speak, but managed only a rough croak. The creature heard in the air above them, close now, and then swooped. Delmare saw red, hungry eyes and a flash of bad fangs. A long, forked tail hung down behind it as it came, cutting the air in lazy swings like a swimming snake, thick and strong, and they were going to die. Elminster raised an eyebrow. Light pulsed and winked along the front of the black wings, and abruptly it was gone. The night air suddenly empty. There was a shrill scream to the east. Delmare appeared trembling and saw something dark and flapping crashing into a leaning stone spire. There was a wet, heavy sound as the monster that had menaced them impaled itself helplessly on the stone. A choking, groaning noise, and then silence. Black wings hung limp. A moment later, something else dark and leathery flapped up from behind and spire and glided into the land on the black corpse, claws out. Delmare looked away as it began to feed.